Hi, I'm Ashley. I'm 18, I'm straight, and I'm a female. I've never really thought about why I'm straight or why I'm a female. It's just always been something that I've been certain of. But I have been thinking a lot about my race, but I'll get to that in a second. I grew up in a pretty standard household. My parents are divorced. I have a younger brother. Whenever I saw my family, I'd usually spend a lot of time with them. But probably one of the biggest influences in my life has been my grandpa, and I mentioned that in my personal reflection essay. He's been one of the biggest influences in my life because he'd always taught me that there's always room to be kind, there's always a way to be kind. You just have to find it in you. He taught me that there pretty much if there's a will, there's a way. You can do anything you put your mind to, and you shouldn't settle for anything. Um, because he was so kind, that really has like had a really big impact on who I am today. Um, but I'll go over to my dad's side of the family now, I guess. My dad's side of the family is Chinese. And I guess from the stereotype, you can guess that they're pretty strict and they're pretty stringent about their priorities and their expectations and what they expect from other people. But that has actually had a really big influence on how I used to view them. We'd have breakfast every Saturday morning, and I would hate going. I would hate it so much just because all we'd ever talk about is school this, school that. What do you want to do with your life? Oh, you want to do that? That's not going to make a lot of money. And that would actually really bother me just because I value happiness more than I value monetary gain. And I get that monetary gain and money and finance and all of that stuff is really important when it comes to getting along in life, but I don't hold that to be my number one. Um, so I would always get ridiculed for that and everything. So I grew to have this almost deep-seated resentment towards them, which sounds really awful because like they're my family. But anyways, I would not really willingly accept them. But as a freshman in high school, I went to China during my winter break, and I saw that they were a certain way because of the way they grew up and the way their parents raised them. So I couldn't necessarily judge them off that just because it wasn't who they wanted to be, it's who they were raised to be. And so that wasn't really fair on my part, and me being so heavily against generalizations, like the typical ones you hear, like black people are thugs, white people are always rich, all of that stuff. I realized that I was practicing something that I didn't deem acceptable when other people did them. So I stopped criticizing my family for that, and it became a lot easier to talk to them and everything. But also, like off that, I realized that just because they're a certain way doesn't mean that I have to be a certain way. And just because I recognize that culture is a certain way doesn't mean that I have to have that certain set of expectations, priorities, or anything like that. Like, I can be who I want independent of how my race is stereotyped. Going off that, I want to talk about race a little bit. In Nancy Leung's Racial Capitalism, she defines racial capitalism as the economic and social commodification of an individual's racial identity. I want to highlight the use of the word social for a second because I want to talk about the social construction of race. Nancy Leung, she actually gives credibility to this idea that race is socially constructed by saying that we have come to believe, or at least we claim to believe, that diversity is an intrinsically desirable sociological condition. By giving race such recognition and such emphasis within our society, we believe that it exists as a social truth, and then we treat it as it should exist. Yes, the civil rights era and the atrocities that happened then are awful. Like, it's horrible what these people had to go through. Yes, slavery happened. Yes, the Holocaust happened. Yes, all of these things that humanity committed against itself happened. But they happened because one group of people thought it was okay to target another group of people based on their skin color. It's just a social construct. That's all it is. It wouldn't exist. None of these things would exist if we didn't believe in them. And so although we should recognize that yes, these things happened, we shouldn't treat them as if they are still happening. I understand that a lot of Black people feel the need to talk about the injustices that they have experienced. Yes, it affects them on a personal level, and I think we need to get past that. Yes, it happened, but does it have to continue to happen? No. Should we bring attention to the things that happened? Yes, we should. We should, but we shouldn't let it currently dictate what is happening now. Like, for example, what we talked about in class one day about white privilege, you asked the question of whether white people should still be held accountable for slavery. That kind of made me a little angry, to put it in nicer terms, but I thought that was a little ridiculous because, yes, white people should be held accountable for slavery, but should white people now be held accountable for slavery? Absolutely not. If we now, white people, had a say in whether slavery occurred or not, a majority, I mean, despite some of the radical groups in the South, would probably say, no, it shouldn't have happened, it should not happen still. But to be held accountable and to bring up that idea is a little extreme. It's kind of ridiculous. But with that, if we recognize that race doesn't exist, then it doesn't exist. I mean, social constructs are made. Social constructs are believed in. So they don't have to be made. They don't have to be believed in. And we can fix that. That's also what I've taken away from this class too, because at first, when Selena had talked about the social construction of race in the very, very beginning, I was so confused. I had no idea what she was saying, and I don't think a lot of the class really believed her either, but when I started to look into it a little bit and to see how to fix race, I realized that, yeah, okay, Selena had a good point. Race doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. And I think if we recognize that, then the problem will fix itself. In response to what Nancy Leong proposed, she proposed the idea of reactive commodification, which is basically noticing when commodification occurs, labeling it as commodification, and kind of condemning those who practiced that and having them compensate those who were targeted. I don't really see this as being effective because it looks more like a monetary apology rather than a sincere one. And if you really want to target, I feel, if you really want to target something, you have to actually withdraw that emotion from people and make them realize that, yeah, that I can't believe I just did that, that's really bad. You can't just be like, oh, slap on the wrist, all this stuff. Because if you want to talk about white privilege and how non-whites are financially more stable than non-whites, then the commodification that they practice might hinder them a little bit economically, but it's not going to be like, oh my goodness, I should never do that again. I understand that it's bad. It's that I know I shouldn't do this because it's going to hurt me. It doesn't like put it on a human level to understand that what you're doing is bad. And I think that's the problem with Nancy Leong's proposal.